I think when a person has really had a chance to heal something, that they want to give it back. They know the value of having had a chance to heal and do life differently and make better choices and have more fulfilling relationships, and you just want to give it back.
And welcome everyone to another episode of Humanity 2.0 podcast, where we are talking to fellow humans about humanity. Today's guest is Phyllis Leavitt, who is an author and a psychotherapist as well. Phyllis, you are amazing as a woman and as an author. I cannot wait to just dive in and ask you all sorts of fun questions. But my first question is, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. In fact, I just had an amazing conversation with one of my grown children and just got off the phone with him. And that's feeling really good because we're all learning to practice what we preach.
Is that the theme of 2026, you think?
Oh, I never thought about that, but I love it. Thank you.
I feel like there's so much excitement and so much potential. So it's looking good so far.
Great.
What'd you guys talk about? I'm nosy.
Oh, just family dynamics and unpacking some of the sticky places in families, which always come up, I think, or at least do for many people, and having a really open-minded, respectful conversation was just really beautiful.
And so is it a different kind of conversation coming from like a psychotherapist background when you talk with your family, or is it just like everyday families?
I think it's really hard if you've been a psychotherapist not to have that inform the way you behave in human relations, or at least help you reflect on when you're not doing so well in your human relations. But I do think that the communication things that I've learned and the issues around being accountable for yourself and how we talk to one another definitely inform all of my relationships, I would say.
And is this field what you desired from a young age, or how did you fall into psychotherapy?
No, I didn't learn any of this at a young age at all. And I don't think anybody talked about psychology or communication skills or, I think I grew up in a world that was very similar to most people, which is this is right and this is wrong. You're good or you're bad, kind of thing. A more black and white, and a lot just not said, never mentioned when there's a problem or disagreement. There's either overt disagreement without the skills to work it out, or it just all gets buried and it creates like something seething under the surface, or buried farther than that where it doesn't come out at all. So that's how I grew up. Nobody talked about anything really emotional when I grew up. And they didn't know how to. My parents really had no clue about how to do that, and it was very uncomfortable for them. But I had some significant trauma in my childhood, and I buried that because I had no language for it. And it all kind of came to the surface in my 30s. And I went to therapy finally myself. And that's where I began to really find voice for what needed to be said and what needed to be healed. And out of that, I became a psychotherapist myself.
How long did you attend school?
Well, I did undergraduate work, not just in humanities. And then I wasn't in school for a while. I had children and I went back to school when my youngest was very young. And that's when I knew I really wanted to study psychology. And it was a 2-year program, I believe.
That's amazing that you come from a place where those feelings aren't discussed or even named, and then to helping people and to writing and really just embracing that part of you. And now it's who you are. It's part of your story. And that's
Right.
so awesome.
And I'm grateful for it. I'm really grateful that, I think, I don't know if everyone would agree with this or has this experience, but I think we do have inner guidance somewhere if we really listen and if we're allowed to listen. I mean, there are many people who aren't allowed to listen to their own instinctual knowing. And I feel grateful that I was. And I think I was guided to be exactly where I went and do exactly what I did. And it was a very fulfilling career.
When you say not being allowed to listen, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think a lot of times children, especially, they have feelings and they have perceptions. And if that isn't in alignment with either what their parents can tolerate or believe, or they don't think children should have a voice, or they're not interested, or they just want to impose their own view, or there's some kind of constriction around what's socially acceptable, or if there's harsh punishment for disagreement. You learn to like keep that to yourself because it's not safe. If it's really not safe to express who you are and what you need, even if you're wrong, or what you want is inappropriate. If it's not safe, you just learn to bury that part of yourself. And for many people, and I think myself to some degree, um, I learned not to listen to my own instincts because I doubted them or I didn't trust them. And that was part of my healing journey, was to look back and think, whoa, I got that. I picked that vibe up from that person, or I really knew that without anybody saying it. And I need to learn how to actually listen to that part of myself. And I think that part of ourselves can actually become a guide through life.
Hmm. Did your inner guidance provide you with confidence, or did they work hand in hand? Do you recall when you realized your confidence in moving forward?
I don't think it was a moment. I think it was a practice. you know, when I was in my first marriage, which I left, um, my ex-husband was having an affair, and he denied it, and I wanted to deny it, but I knew. And it took me a long time to just let myself know what I knew
Hmm.
and then act on it. Um, and so but out of that experience and out of other experiences, that was just a really kind of notable one. I started asking myself, I actually started asking myself, when did you have intuitions about things that you didn't listen to? Because I would say that 99% of the time they were right. And I think if we're really allowed to tune into our own nervous system's responses and unspoken cues from people, the nonverbal language that we show with our eyes and our facial expression and our body language and our tone of voice, that we actually do know a lot more about what's going on than what is said.
Hmm. I agree. I find that these days I'm asking myself more than I did before. And even something as simple as, what do you need right now? I
Right,
never asked it,
right,
never once, because
right.
I was raising, I was raising my husband's son, and I was raising my husband. I mean, I feel you on that first divorce. It's happening. But
Right.
yeah, today I asked, I was like, what do you need right now? Because I didn't feel right. I, physically didn't feel right, just all together. And I thought, what do you need right now? Okay, we need something to drink. We need a vitamin. We need food. We need, we need nourishment, essentially.
Mhm.
I wouldn't have asked myself that before. So,
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think especially it's probably true for everyone because we're not taught to ask ourselves what we need. We're taught to do what other people say, more or less, and think we need what they think we need, or not need. But I think that especially when you're a mother, you really do put your children
mhm.
first for the most part. And so you stop listening sometimes to what you need, when really I think for our mental health, we need to have a balance between what we do for others and what we give to others and the attention we give, and also take care of ourselves.
Having been on the patient side and then also on the therapist side, do you feel that you have a different perspective as a therapist and as a patient? That doesn't quite make sense. What I'm meaning to
Different
say,
different perspective than what?
well, I
Yeah.
guess I often wonder about therapists that have been patients before. I feel like they are more informed and they're more in tune with their current patients. Is that the case, or is it just different for everyone?
Well, I could only speak for myself with that. I can't imagine being a therapist without having done therapy myself, without facing things that were really hard to face, without feeling my pain in front of another person, without really getting some feedback that I wasn't able to give myself. Um, so I can't imagine that. And I think because in my own journey, I really went into the dark night of the soul and came out the other side, which I think many people do when there's been abuse in their childhood, or some kind of trauma death or, abandonment or whatever it is, poverty, um, that I felt like I could go anywhere with anyone to the depths of their pain and not be frightened by it, not believe them. It just gave me such compassion and such openness
Mm-hmm.
to what we really need from each other at times in the healing process is to have somebody be the witness to what we went through and really hold the light for us at the end of the tunnel. And so I feel like I learned that from being a client. I learned that from being a therapist. I didn't really learn that in graduate school, which is
Mm-hmm.
interesting. Learned more processes and psychological, dynamics and all those things that were super valuable. But it's not the same thing as actually meeting the person in the room on that emotional level.
Do you still have things that come up from when you were younger that resurface?
I think yes. I mean, I don't know anybody who doesn't. Like I think we're in a healing journey or healing process. I don't, I would be suspect of someone who said, I'm done. I've
Mm.
done it all. I'm totally healed. We're in a process, because we're human, you know.
Yes. Speaking of humanness, if you were to think a moment about the word humanity, what story or what picture or what words come to mind for you?
The first word that comes to my mind is family. I think we belong and we need to belong. We're wired. Science knows we're wired for love and belonging when we come into this world. And I think family is so precious and not necessarily valued in our current culture the way that I believe is psychologically and emotionally healthy for human beings. And I think that's part of the reason why we're suffering so.
Hmm. In what ways can we be better for our families?
Well, I think to number one, to like really have a focus on family. We have so many role models for success and wealth and influence and position and authority, and sometimes sadly superiority and inferior, like judgment of other people and ourselves that because the world that I grew up in and the world that I studied in as a therapist was really based in family systems. Certainly, we look at our own individual psychological development and wounds and the healing process for an individual, but it's really tied to our early conditioning in our families. And today, our families are not just our families of origin, they're our communities, they're what we digest from social media, their politics, their culture, it's religion, it's economics, it's racial relations, it's gender relations. This is all part of the family dynamic that we all live in. And so having that grounding in what are the attributes of a healthy family system, not that anyone ever does it perfectly, and what are the attributes of a really dysfunctional or abusive family system has given me a lens on our larger family systems. And I would call them all family systems. Politics is a family system, culture is a family system, community is, school is, business is. Um, they're all based in either healthy or unhealthy family systems, and they play out with either support and valuing and a commitment to nonviolence and working things out with each other, or they play out as abuse and neglect on a very large scale.
Mhm. And so people who did not have that initial family surrounding, maybe they grow up without families and then they meet people along the way and they create new families. Do they have the potential to have just as healthy experiences with these new families that they develop?
You mean considering which kind of background? Like,
Like,
let's
so if
see,
you grow up without a family, right?
right.
And then you then have a family later on, is it possible that they'll be just as well rounded, not having had that initial foundation as of
Mhm.
family?
I would say more or less my experience is this. I think I would say both and kind of to what you're saying. I think there are people who come out of highly dysfunctional families or loss or grief or abandonment or overt abuse or neglect or whatever they come out of, maybe rigid expectations that no one can meet. Or severe imbalances between genders as the role model, who just reenact exactly what they learned. There are people who just, that's the imprint about what relationship is about, and they play it out in their adult life. And there are people who, and I don't know the difference, why some people react one way and why some people react another way. But then there are people who are bound and determined that they will not do it the way it was done to them, and they do everything that they can to be different kinds of partners and different kinds of parents and different kinds of coworkers and all the rest. But somewhere in the middle, I would say that even those of us, and I'll speak of myself as being more in the second category, of sort of bound and determined not to do it the way that I grew up. um, I think unless you have a chance to really heal some of that early conditioning and wounding, you're bound to repeat something, even if the dysfunction is mostly aimed at yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need a chance to heal from really poor conditioning. And of course, there are exceptions. There are people who just rise from the ashes of terrible early childhood and they're pristine. But I think most of us carry that wound and act it out somewhere.
Oh, definitely, 100%. Yeah, I would say I'm in that group as well. The second one, not the third one, but
Right,
um,
right,
yeah,
right. I don't know
I
anybody in the third one.
right, right. The Lord is in the third one.
Right,
um, I went through life, but raising myself, but my family dynamic with my son and with my husband at the time, it was everything opposite of what I grew up with because I grew up with
right,
nothing. So I created this
right.
really good environment. I taught my son to be very self sufficient and very smart and compassionate. But my biggest thing was that when he moved out to go to school or whatever it was he was going to go to when he was 18, I told him that I would teach him all the basic fundamentals as well, how to write a check, how to balance your checkbook, all this stuff, because I didn't want him to call me at 2 in the morning asking, how do I turn on the washer dryer?
Right.
And so he knows how to turn on the washer and dryer. And he did very well when he moved out. And then he came back. So no one tells you that they come back.
Right, right,
And now he's on
right.
his way out again. But he's so smart and he's attuned to other people's needs. And same thing, he had previous experience with his biological mother of not feeling the love and a lot of trauma. And so I think the same is true of him, that he tries his best to give love and to receive everyone, as he was not treated when he was younger. So that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and I see two categories of people, and these are general categories. And of course, so there's no one size that ever fits all. But from dysfunctional homes, including abuse and neglect, dysfunction is on a continuum from maybe emotionally not so healthy or unavailable to overt abuse and neglect. But I see kind of two patterns emerge that I think in our society and as a whole today are alarming, as well as they are alarming in our own individual lives. And one of them is learned helplessness.
Hmm.
You learn to be helpless because there is no way to fight back or get rescued or have a voice, or not be hurt further. And so you learn to be helpless actually as a survival mechanism, and that can carry with you into your adult life. And so when you read stories of, a parent standing by and watching their child be abused by somebody else and they don't do anything, they have been impaired. That's not a natural response. Something has happened to them that they freeze in the face of that kind of abuse rather than mobilize their appropriate defenses. And so this learned helplessness, I think, affects many people in our society today. They're more easily controlled. They may be even convinced to align with an abusive person or system because they've lost that sense of their personal will. And the other group are people who have identified with the abuser themselves and become the aggressor and
Mhm.
become the dominator and become the one who doesn't have empathy for their impact on other people. And so for me, that's a loud call for healing on a very collective level as well as an individual level.
I think so many people will resonate with this message and this recording. So thank you so much for sharing that. I really wanted people without families to also have have a voice and hear what you had to say about that. So thank you so very much. Um, Humans remind us of our shared humanness all the time. Do you have a particular story or memory of another human that impacted you and made you think, ah, yes, that's humanity at its best?
At its best. Ooh, let's see. There's probably a million stories. I'm just going to tell you something from my early life that really made an impression on me. Um, so I was very shut down as a young person. I was just very, very shut down, afraid of my own emotions. I did not I had friends, but I would say that for the most part, I kept myself to myself, and I was pretty self-focused, not because I was a selfish person, but because I think I was absorbed with all the unprocessed pain that I was trying to hide from myself. And I went into I was in a spiritual group when I was very young, and we had all these, it was back in the kind of hippie days, and we had all these businesses, and one of the businesses in this group was a bakery. And one of the women, I went in and got something from the bakery, and she started telling me about how she had made a birthday cake for this other person in this group because it was his birthday. And it wasn't like her boyfriend, it was just a random person in the group whose birthday it was. And I just was struck by her generosity of spirit. Like, she wasn't, that's just who she was. Like,
Mm.
I'm making a birthday cake for this guy. I know it sounds so little, but it's a story I've never forgotten because I didn't live in that. I didn't grow up with that kind of generosity of really looking out for what other people might really respond to in a wonderful way. And it just wasn't a part of my love language for being in relationship with other people. And I never forgot that. And I felt like I really learned something from her. Like, oh, that felt so good to hear. And I felt kind of shamed as well.
Mm.
But at the same time, it was a real lesson for me. So it's that. I think humanity at its best is our generosity of spirit for one another, our, noticing somebody else and actually caring about our impact on them and going out of our way to have a good impact.
That's amazing. How something so small could have such a huge impact on you.
It did.
It kind of makes you think that in our everyday actions, we also have to be very mindful of what we do and how we interact with other humans, because
Right.
that in turn, every single moment that you interact with someone, that is impactful in one way, shape, or form, and could be really
Right.
huge, just like yours.
Right. And that's being a family member in the family of mankind. That's being like a loving family member in the family. And it's not always that easy. It's not always just making a birthday cake for somebody. Sometimes it's dealing with a very, very challenging situation. But I think the principle remains the same.
Hmm. Definitely. There is a a band that I like very much, and there's a lyric that says, be mindful of how you treat every living soul." I never really thought about it, but years later, I was like, "Oh, okay, I get it now." You really
Yeah.
should be mindful on how you treat every living
Mhm.
soul, every living thing. I think that's very true. When it comes to hardship, they say that hardship teaches empathy. Is there a particular moment of hardship for you where it taught you a new level of empathy that you were not familiar with?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's not a moment. I think going through my own therapy and and really like releasing like really deep pent up pain and finding um so this is what I would say. I think what one of the things that trauma does to people, which is definitely the way that it impacted me, was that you cover over some of the best parts of yourself because it doesn't feel safe to have them in the world. Um, and you might not even know they're there. For me, I knew there was something buried inside of me that I really wanted. I knew that I had more life force. I knew I had more love in me. I knew I had more just creativity than I was expressing. And so going through the layers of the pain that covered that up and finding a much deeper connection to my most essential innocent self, which we all have, everyone has. None of us were born evil. The little infant that we were born was not evil. That's my belief anyway. Um, Getting in touch with that and going through that process gave me so much empathy for the defenses that we develop, because
Mm.
I had defenses. I didn't want to talk about things. I didn't want to show my feelings. I didn't let a lot of people in. I was as critical of other people as I was of myself.
Hmm.
Um, and I think just going through that healing process for myself, which as I said, is an ongoing process. But there was a chunk that I did that was really big, grew empathy in me. And it helped me see that even when people behave horribly, there's a hurt person inside of them that really does need attention. It doesn't excuse their bad behavior, but there's more to it than they're not just a bad person.
Yeah. I am reminded of, I guess, in my own journey, there are things that I know that are hidden, but more so like on purpose, like as though like it's my brain protecting me from these things that I'm just
Hmm.
not yet ready to face. And a lot of it I do recall, and I have shared that with my own therapist. But I feel like there are still things that even I cannot recall just because it's not the time for that.
Right. Well, I'll tell you something that I learned both as a client and a therapist, and that is that your psyche knows how much you can tolerate. I really believe that, and that when you're ready, if you ever need to be, you will uncover those things if you need to for your
Mm.
own healing. And if you don't, your psyche's just not going to take you there. So I really learned to trust that in my own experience, like I said, as a client and as a therapist. Some
Mhm.
people are just not ready to dive straight into being molested or being beaten or whatever it is, and their psyche will show them when it's time.
Yeah. And there's something to be said about forgiving your abusers too, and getting to that place where you can do that, but also, forgive yourself and understand that it's not your fault, etc. Yeah.
Right.
So much of a journey. I'm so glad you're on this journey.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Society often judges what we don't understand. What can you tell us about psychotherapy and what people don't understand?
Yeah. Well, I think that goes right along with what you just said. And that is that what I have come to believe is that inside the most abusive, violent, hateful person is some place where they either got hurt and they never got, and sometimes horribly hurt, years of abuse or years of neglect or years of overt discrimination, or some kind of violation or being ostracized from society or blamed for whatever, that inside that person is a victim somewhere. And it also may be that they weren't horribly abused. It may be that there were just no boundaries in
Mm.
their childhood and they could do whatever they want and feel no remorse for their impact on other people. And they kind of were taught to be self centered and selfish and not have any empathy for other people. But they're both forms of abuse and neglect in a certain way, because that's an emotionally neglectful childhood if you don't have good boundaries and limits and learn to understand that you're not the only person in the room. Um, so I think, and this is a very delicate place because, and I struggle to hold this inside. If I believe, which I do, that inside the perpetrator is a really unhealed person who deserves healing and who deserves to have that place in them met while they're held accountable for what they did that was hurtful. I think we live in a society that doesn't operate on that principle. We're very punitive. We're very quick to call people monsters and evil and lock them up and throw away the key and not even consider that they might be responsive to a healing environment and that they could change and grow and be accountable for what they did, but also forgive themselves for whatever emerged from the terrible things that they have experienced. And I'll tell you, as a therapist, I've heard some stories that are of what people have gone through that are just hard to even fathom that they lived through it. So, in a way, you want to say, well, how could you not have had symptoms?
Mm-hmm.
How could you not have had symptoms if you were molested through your whole childhood, or your father took you to other people to be raped,
Mm-hmm.
which happens to people? I mean, how could you not be symptomatic? And I think we live in a society that blames people for their symptoms rather than tries to help them.
It reminds me of what you said in the beginning about the polarization in the black and white and how, that's how you were raised. And
Right.
even now, I mean, there's been so many advances in so many areas, but those core foundations are still there too. Do you ever have conversations with your younger self, your inner child? Do you talk to your inner child, and what do you talk about?
Oh, it's such a good question. When I first went to therapy, I didn't want anything to do with my inner child because I didn't like her. I just didn't like her. I didn't want to feel her. I didn't want to feel her pain. I didn't, period.
Mm,
Um, and I think being in a safe enough place to actually unravel what happened to her and what she made it believe about herself and how she learned to cope gave me empathy for her. And so now I think it's not so much of a conversation with her. I did have that when I was in the throes of therapy. Like, I would talk to her, and I would tell her, okay, this situation is trying for you. I'm going to take over as my adult. And when I get home, you can have your feelings, and I would do that. I don't do that anymore. But what I do now is I can really recognize when that inner child part of me is triggered and work really hard to find my back into my adult woman self to manage whatever's going on in my life, because the child part of us can't do it. It can't navigate adult relationships well.
mm-hmm. Can you tell us what is the why behind the work that you do, and then tell us about your work?
Yeah, so I'll just talk about my most recent book. I've written 3 books. The first 2 books that I wrote were really about my own healing journey and getting in touch with that deep connection to my authentic self, my deepest inner self. And my third book is called America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. So I'm going to talk about that one. Um, so, having done the work that I did as a client and understanding that I really went into therapy thinking I was just a flawed person. There's something terribly wrong with me. I was born that way and it probably can't be fixed, but I'm here trying. you know and out of therapy, one of the many things I realized was that no, I was part of a family dynamic that wasn't super healthy, and I had my own unhealthy responses to that, because that's sometimes the best you can do. You're just trying to survive. And so then when I went to graduate school and I learned so much about family systems and how they operate and how we play roles in our families. One child might become very passive and submissive. One child is the one who acts out. One is the hero and, becomes the savior of everybody. Or one child, and these are, roles that you can read about in any book. One child kind of disappears and doesn't want to be seen and hides out. One child might be, an addict or go to prison or whatever. We play different roles especially when there's dysfunction. When in a relatively healthy family, I think people have permission to be themselves more or less, um, and navigate conflict in a healthy, more or less healthy way. But so I'm really talking about in an unhealthy family, we learn to play a role, and that role stays with us: the aggressor, the helpless one, the hero, the one who disappears, the one who drinks too much, the one who, all of that. And um, So from being in my practice and seeing the roles that people took on and then blame themselves for or blame other people for, instead of really understanding they were part of a family dynamic, and the healing process gives us the opportunity to choose a different role. That's what it does. You actually experience that you can choose a different role than the one you just unconsciously fell into as a child. I began to see that that's exactly what happens in society, that I call it the family of America. It's all groups of people operate on some kind of family dynamics, healthy or not. And we tend to play the same roles we played before if we don't have exposure to either some healing process or a better role model, or a healthier environment that role models that for that us for role models that for us as adults. And to the extent that many people, who identified with the aggressor, and this is not all people, and I'm never saying one size fits all, but there are many people who identify with the aggressor who look for positions where they can dominate other people. And they become the kind of boss that is not affirming of people, doesn't treat their employees well, has to be one up, doesn't give people affirmation for the good that they do, or sees people as replaceable, um, or who misuses or exploits them in some way. And again, I'm talking generalities here. I'm not talking about every single person, and that people who learn to be helpless or more submissive tend to take on more submissive roles in their social functioning, in school, in jobs, in relationships. Um, and I felt like I needed to talk about that, among other things, that we bring our dysfunction with us into, and particularly into politics. We have people in positions of power who are so identified with the aggressor and have never had a chance to heal or even know that they need healing, because one of the things that abusive people do, and I talk about all of this in great depth in my book, one of the things that happens in an abusive family is that the abuser, who's probably been abused, the abuser justifies their abuse. I did that to her because she, I hit him because he, I locked him out of the house because blah, blah. They always justify the abuse by blaming the victim.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we do as a society. We blame our victims, then we blame them for their symptoms, and they don't have a chance. And there are whole segments of our society where that's the case, where people are targeted for being seen as inferior or less deserving or whatever we target them for, and then we justify mistreating them. And we bring a lot of people along with us into the belief that that's justified. And then we're surprised when that person becomes a mass murderer or shoots up a classroom or kills their parent or whatever. And I'm not saying that every single person who does that was mistreated. I'm not
Right.
trying to make that kind, but there are patterns that we can identify from all of our work as psychotherapists and psychologists, that really need to be understood on a societal level if we're ever really going to heal and stop the cycle of abuse.
And the other part of the question about why you do the work that you do, the what is your why?
Yeah. So the why is, and I think this is true for many people. So I'm going to say it this way. I think when a person has really had a chance to heal something, that they want to give it back. I just think that's normal. You see so many people who go, for instance, through drug treatment, who become drug and alcohol counselors because they know the value of having had a chance to heal and do life differently and make better choices and have more fulfilling relationships. And you just want to give it back. And I think that's what happened to me from going to therapy is, oh, I just want to do this.
That is very beautiful. I love it. If you could share a message with humanity, any message at all, and feel free to take a moment, what would that message be?
Yeah. Well, I've been asked that question a lot of times, and I have different answers at different times. But I think there's probably two things that I would say. One of them is, it's not selfish to focus on your own healing. It's the best thing you can do for yourself and for everybody that you interact with. So that's, and I think it's not shameful to admit that you need help. I think the world of the way we look at psychology and psychotherapy has changed, but I think there's still a stigma around crying and feeling your pain and needing other people to actually help you. I think we have a stigma around that still. And so, what I want to say and what I believe is it takes courage to go to therapy, or it takes courage to face your own wounding and maybe the ways you've been wounding, and really try to heal that and change your own way of being in the world. It takes courage. It's not a sign of weakness. And the other thing that I would add to that is that, we were talking about this earlier when I was talking about the girl who made the birthday cake, is like every act of loving kindness you do can be the tiniest thing. It can be not taking that parking space when you know somebody else wants it. It can be saying, "Hi, how are you?" to the person you're checking out with. It all makes a difference. We all thrive best when we're seen and treated well. And it can be the tiniest little thing. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to save the world, because most of us won't.
Or maybe we all do it collectively.
Right, exactly. And that's the point.
Where can people find your work? And are you on social media? Please tell everyone where to find your work and your book.
Yeah, thank you so much. I will have a website, which is my name, Phyllis Leavitt, Phyllis. Well, I guess you see it on your screen.com. And you can order my books through my website, but they're on all the major booksellers, Barnes and Noble, Goodreads, Books A Million, Amazon.com, all of that. And my books are A Light in the Darkness, Into the Fire, and America in Therapy, which is the one we were talking about today. And I'm on all the social media, pretty much. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and YouTube. And I have lots of videos of other conversations I've had with wonderful podcasters like yourself. And I have a newsletter you can sign up to get on my website, where I really make an effort to put some content, and I don't use AI. So I write them myself, and really just try to share things that I think go along with my main message.
Yeah. Well, I would say that you are doing one heck of a job giving it back to the world and to humanity. So thank you so much for all that you do and all that you write.
And I want to thank you for being such a wonderful podcast host and sharing yourself the way you do, because that's where we meet in our shared humanity. That's where we meet. And that's in that place we don't want to hurt one another.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words. And for everyone watching or listening, thank you for joining us on Humanity 2.0 podcast. Please be sure to visit the description and check out all of Phyllis's links and her social, and sign up for her newsletter as well. I bet there's awesome information in there for all of us. We'll see you next time on another wonderful episode of Humanity 2.0 podcast. Don't forget to be good to other humans. See you guys next time.